Hi, welcome to the Dieku Podcast. I'm Gary Snow. Today I welcome Jason Cordova, the creative mind behind Brindlewood Bay, the cozy mystery game that features elderly mavens solving TV-style cases within the backdrop of a larger cosmic horror. Jason is also the host of Fear of a Black Dragon and the Darkened Threshold podcast, as well as the founder of the Gauntlet community, which has brought games like Trophy. Jason, welcome.
Oh, hi. Thanks for having me.
Despite my mess ups of the intros, I sometimes get ahead of myself and start thinking too fast, but I am really happy to have you on the show. I'm a fan of your work and a fan of the community that you've built in the Gauntlet. And I just want to maybe start us off with the standard question. How did you get into the hobby and sort of what sparked your interest in it?
Yeah, I go way back with the hobby. So I first got into tabletop role-playing games when I was around 10 years old, fourth grade or so. My dad used to take me to this comic book shop in Oceanside, California. I know this is a really specific story. A comic book shop in Oceanside, California, and I saw the Marvel Superheroes role-playing game, the box set, which is dating me a little bit here, but I didn't know what it was, but I saw it and I was like, oh, that's really cool. I knew it was a game of some sort, but I didn't really know what it was. I had never heard of Dungeons and Dragons or anything like that. So he bought it for me, and I spent probably 2 months reading the books, not having any clue what I was looking at. It just made no sense to me. I couldn't figure out what any of it meant because I didn't have I just didn't have any context. I didn't know I had no context for this form of entertainment. And fortunately, an older kid came over and knew what role-playing games were, taught me how to play. I actually still remember my very first role-playing experience where I was playing this character for Marvel Superheroes. I was playing a bad guy, and my character was robbing this jewelry store, right? And the kid who was GMing the game, he describes the jewelry store and all this other stuff. And then he says, okay, what do you do? And I still really vividly remember this moment in my life where I was like, well, what do you mean? What do I do? I don't know what you mean. And I was like, does it involve these charts? Because remember, Marvel Superheroes held those charts, the face rip charts. Yeah. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what any of it meant. He's like, no, just tell me what you do. Just think about it. What would you do? And so I began describing my guy, looking at the door and seeing if there was an alarm or anything like that, And that was a really, really big turning point for me, because I remember feeling like there was this really incredible amount of possibility, right? It felt so wide open, and that's what hooked me. I still to this day, that feeling is what I always try to kind of return to, this feeling of oh, I can just say what I do, and and then the story happens and we keep going, and we obviously in the years that followed, I would keep going, and I would become a dungeon master for 2E. That was my AD&D of choice. And I, played all the Palladium games, and, did a little bit of Vampire, did a little bit of Shadowrun, all that stuff. But yeah, that was how I got started. It was just I was pretty much hooked from that point. And I actually remember, it's really funny because when I got into the Apocalypse World based games, one of the sort of things in Apocalypse World is you as the MC, you describe whatever's happening in the scene, and then you say, what do you do? And I it's that moment, right? It's lit Vincent and Meg in writing that game were basically kind of codifying this moment from my childhood, right? So it was pretty cool. There's a lot of power in what do you do,
Did you find it difficult the more you were knowledgeable about games, and as you mentioned, you worked through the Palladium and all the different editions and that kind of thing, to get back to that kind of raw state, that young learning state where you what do you do? Did you get lost? Did you lose it at any point?
Well, I kind of bailed on the hobby for about 10 or 12 years. I basically the aughts, I missed all of 3.0 and 3.5 and all that, and 4. I was doing German board games and European board games at that time. That was like my hobby thing, you know? And so I kind of like actually got away from role-playing games. And I actually think part of the reason why I left role-playing games is because I just wasn't satisfied with where things were at. Like it all became so crunchy and so many splat books and so much stuff. It just all became really bloated. And in those years, a lot of people just weren't playing role-playing games. Like it just became kind of a dead hobby for me, at least. Like it kind of dried up, you know, it changed, I felt like. Obviously, you know, new people came in and new things happened. I came back to the hobby in like 2013-ish, because of like the sort of indie role-playing games that were happening at that time. So I got kind of lured back in by, you know, the games of, you know, Jason Morningstar and, you know, the Bakers and people like that, right? And I think that like the reason why those games appeal to me is because on some level they went back to that idea, right? That just really simple, like kind of like, let's just talk and have a conversation. Like we're just telling a story together with a loose framework of rules to make that go, you know, which I think is what all my friends and I were doing back in middle school and high school, right? So it had like a certain appeal in that way. And that's what kind of drew me back was those types of games. Yeah, so I think like 3.5, 4, those editions of D&D were not for me. I had no interest in them. I've still never played them. And what I came back because of this sort of like wave of indie RPGs that was kind of coming out of like the Forge and Story Games forums and stuff like that, right? And that's how the Gauntlet got started too. So.
And you know, speaking of the Gauntlet, it's an incredible community that you've fostered. What was the kind of the seed of that, as far as like how did that kind of grow and form and fostered it?
Yeah, it was it was really pretty accidental in some sense. I had just moved to Houston, Texas. This was in like early 2013. I had just started getting into these, like I said, these like sort of indie lighter role-playing games, and I wanted somebody to play them with. I'd been reading them, but I hadn't been playing them. And I just moved to a new town, so I didn't know anybody. And so I went on Google Plus, you know, RIP Google Plus, and I was just looking for like Houston-based groups that were doing role-playing games. And at that time, it was mostly Pathfinder. Like Pathfinder was kind of the only thing at that time, you know, at least in Houston. But there was this one Google Plus community, which was called the Gauntlet. It was really different than it is now. And it was kind of a dead thing. But I nevertheless just like went on there and I just posted the first post in probably like months. I was like, hey, is there anybody around still? And one person replied. And so, you know, I was like, hey, I'm interested in trying these games out. I was also interested in trying out some of what was then the kind of nascent OSR stuff, you know. I was like, I'd like to try some of these things out. And I just am interested in finding people to play with. And this person who responded, he was like, well, you know what? Like, I have access to my office after hours on the weekends, after Friday, we can go play there. And so I was like, okay, cool. And so me and him and like one other guy got together on a Friday night, and we played some OSR Star Trek game. I don't even remember the name of it. Far Trek, maybe I think it was called. And but then that was just the first thing we played. Every week we met on Fridays and we tried like new games, and then Fridays became Fridays and Sundays, and then that became Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. And at that point, I kind of formalized the Gauntlet as a actual proper entity, and we started. We got some like small sponsorships from some local businesses in Houston to kind of basically just pay for pizza, essentially, you know, for our meetings, you know, in exchange for saying, hey, go down to such and such comic store and, you know, check out their store, you know. And we kind of did that for a little bit. And, but that was basically kind of how it started. Like it just became this like, you know, kind of like thrice weekly in-person event. And the Wednesday group was really, really big. Like at our height in Houston, we had like on Wednesdays, we played at this bar restaurant in Houston, and we had like 6 tables going at a time, you know, at the height of its popularity, which for indie role-playing games, like we're playing Dungeon World and Monster Hearts and, you know, Fiasco and stuff like that. Right. And to have 6 tables like that going every week, or between 4 and 6 tables, was pretty cool. And eventually that gave birth to the Gauntlet podcast, which that's where we started getting like kind of more of an online presence and reaching out beyond Houston, essentially. The Gauntlet then became a strictly online entity, or mostly online entity, as it kept growing, just because more people were interested in what we were doing, and they're not all in Houston. So we started having more online stuff. And the Houston group still exists, actually, but the Gauntlet proper is kind of an online thing. And for years, it was like mostly like an online gaming community. But then we got into publishing. The gaming community part of it kind of split off to form their own thing last year. And the Gauntlet now is kind of principally a publishing group, but we do still have like a very like dedicated core group of gamers in the Gauntlet. You know, we do still play a lot of games. That's sort of like our thing. And, you know, we try to always connect everything we do to this like very basic act of play, right? Like, I think that's really important. And so, so for me, even though like my full-time day job is role-playing game publisher, part of that is still running games. I still run games 4 times a week, you know, even in the middle of like all my publishing duties. And so, yeah, it's really great. It's, you know, so it's kind of grown and morphed and changed over the years. But I'm really proud of it. We've done, you know, we are scrappy and indie to our core. We always will be. It's very central to who we are. And as we've gotten more successful, we've had to like learn how to balance our sort of indie sensibilities and our tastes and with the needs of the business. And so, you know, that's a tricky thing that you have to kind of manage, you know. I'm still kind of learning all that and figuring that out, but I love my job and I love what I do, and yeah, it's great.
When you first started the Gauntlet podcast, and I mean, even now reflecting upon the time that, you know, it was just like in person Friday night time, did you ever think you would get to this point where you are like designing and being a
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I try to think. I think back on that sometimes, and you know, in those early days, it was just me and Dan and our little core group of people who were just like, we just love these games and we wanted a space to talk about them. And the early days of the Gauntlet podcast, I mean, for probably the first year of the Gauntlet podcast, we never had more than like, I don't know, 50 listeners or something. Like, you know, it was always very, very small, you know, and so it was always a kind of rough and ready kind of production, you know. But I think for me, I think I would have been content just talking about games and playing games and still having my day job, and I would have been happy with that and doing that. You know, if that's how it had worked out. But what ended up happening, though, the reason why we got into more of a publishing thing, it was out of necessity, because we started to just need more money because our ambitions for the community just started to grow, and you got to pay for that stuff. And so we as part of our Patreon launch, we included some small published materials, you know, as part of that. And that's really how the publishing got started, because we just needed to bring people to the Patreon so that we could pay our bills. But as I got into it, I discovered that I really like it, you know, like I really like publishing. I really like game writing, creative writing in general. Brindlewood Bay was the first thing I ever wrote. And like, that's, you know, like it was, I found out that I was, you know, pretty good at it. And it was and I loved it, and it's an industry that I love. And so, yeah, it all just, you know, there was no plan until there was, you know, like it started to be like a more of a plan, like in say 2019 or so. But prior to that, it was just trying to kind of like pay the bills and figure it out as we go, kind of thing. Yeah.
And you mentioned the publications, and is that Codex or the
the Codex magazine?
The Codex magazine.
No longer with us in active publication, but we did publish about 50 issues of this online digital. Was it 50 issues? It was something like that. This like online digital magazine, Codex, which was really high quality, like really different for the time. Like it was pretty, like we were kind of doing like cool, messy, stylized layouts like years before, you know, Morkborg and all of them, right? Like we were doing this kind of like particular look that a lot of people weren't doing. It was kind of unheard of. And but it was just like little capsule games and supplements for existing games. It wasn't like a game itself. It was just like supplementary material. And when we started to do standalone games, that's really when our business kind of changed. And as much as I love Codex, and as important as Codex was to my development as a publisher and a game writer, it doesn't really fit our model anymore, but it was cool while it lasted. And it's still a really interesting product. I mean, like, and all the issues are still really relevant. Like, we still sell them. They're on drive-through, and folks can go check them out. I mean, from a visual standpoint, they're stunning. From a content standpoint, there's a lot of gems in there. There's a lot of like little individual standalone games, like the kinds of games that are now found on itch.io. We were like kind of putting a polish on games like that and putting them in one publication back then. But there's not really any kind of space for a Codex type publication anymore, in my opinion. I don't think it really has a place in the market anymore, and so we've kind of moved on and from it. But the issues that are out there are really great, and I'm really proud of it.
I know when Trophy kind of hit a critical mass, and I started digging more into it, and I went, oh, well, how do I find this? And then I had to go back into the Codex Dark 2.
It's buried in various issues. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think 2018, and I found it, and I was like, oh, okay, so was that the nugget, the seed that started the Trophy?
Yeah. So Trophy was kind of Trophy, for folks who don't know, it's this, now it's actually two different games, but back then it was just a single game called Trophy about, treasure hunters going into a forest that doesn't want them there. It was very much inspired by Symbaroum, by Free League. We wanted to make essentially like a rules light Symbaroum, a Symbaroum that we would care to play basically. And, we loved a lot about Symbaroum, but just not the gameplay. And so we kind of created like a game that was fundamentally an homage to Symbaroum in a lot of ways. It kind of became its own thing, but that's how it started. And so we published the original rule set in an issue of Codex, and then what we decided was, well, this is pretty popular. People like it. Like, can we keep supporting it? And so Codex, what we would do is we release brand new scenarios for it, which are called incursions in issues of Codex. And so that sort of was the template for what our future publications look like. Eventually Codex, we compiled it all into standalone books, and a setting book. And there's a spin-off game called Trophy. There's a spin-off game of Trophy that we called Trophy Gold. And then we call the original Trophy Dark now. And then there's a supplement book called Trophy Loom. And we kickstarted this like three book set, that sort of took all the stuff that was in Codex, expanded upon it, added new stuff, and really made it like a proper standalone game product. But that was really an interesting project, because it was essentially like kind of a model for the way we publish, which is we start with a digital version of the game. We let that digital version, which is complete and playable, we let that exist for a year or two, and then we take it to crowdfunding for the big splashy physical edition, right? So that's what we did with Brindlewood Bay. Brindlewood Bay came out in early 2020, like January 2020, in digital form as a small booklet game. And then in 2022, we actually kickstarted the physical editions, which are now actually incidentally landing in people's mailboxes. And so the advantage of doing it that way, of having this like long, like kind of almost like a beta, but it's a really polished beta, in digital form before we go to Kickstarter, is we give the game time to build up a fan base, right? So when we launched the Brindlewood Bay Kickstarter, there were people ready for it, right? Like they had been playing the older digital version, and so they knew Brindlewood Bay, they knew the characters, they knew the style of play. They were excited about the possibility of a physical form, and they were excited about the possibility of like expanded content, revised content. We've had a couple years to understand this game and what to do with it, and that's how we've done our game, The Between, which is the next game that we're kickstarting sometime this year, probably in a few months, which is another game that I authored, based on the Carve from Brindlewood system. And then, obviously we have other games that are in the pipeline as well, like Public Access and the Silt versus role-playing game and other things coming up. So our style is to, or our model is to let the game live in a digital form, find its audience, and then take it to crowdfunding, as opposed to go straight to crowdfunding. So yeah.
Do you think because you already have a built-in community of followers that works versus I know I've talked to a number of other designers that they feel that, well, I need to get it on Kickstarter to get eyeballs on it because otherwise nobody's seeing it.
Yeah, and that's probably true for them. Our approach is different. We have that, we always have the gauntlet, right? I mean, like my math and experience tells me that we launch every new project with a certain number of people who we can count on, right? Like, so I suspect when we launch the Between, we'll probably launch pretty strong with probably a few thousand backers to start, and then it's our job to build on that as the campaign progresses. We're very, I don't want to say lucky because it's not luck. We worked hard as hell to make this happen, but what we did was we have podcasts. We're always in communication with our folks, like our podcasts. For example, the Darkened Threshold, which is our new one, that podcast is about talking about our games. Fundamentally, it's about talking about mystery horror games, the mystery horror genre. But within that, we talk a lot about Brindlewood Bay, the Between, public access, and so forth. But also, like, I put all of my games that I run on YouTube, right? So that people who want to see how to run Brindlewood Bay can watch me do it, and then of course we have the community, and it absolutely helps. I mean, it's very critical, and we still have our Patreon. We support our Patreon still with new things, like even though we don't do codex anymore, we still release like things for our games, periodically in the Patreon. And so we have that. We're very fortunate in that we've developed this kind of like following. And so we have the luxury of letting a game exist in a digital form for a couple of years to let it just grow more before we have to, like, taking it to crowdfunding is important. It's an important part of the business, but it's not like it's not how we like get our initial enthusiasm. Like we don't go to crowdfunding until people are like salivating for the game.
They're frothing to get it. Yeah. Cool. And speaking of the Gauntlet podcast, and I mentioned before we started recording of like I've been working my way through like the history of it and that kind of thing. But episode 2, you talked about Powered by the Apocalypse, and it seemed
I believe you. I'll take your word for that.
it seemed fairly new to you at the time, and and so it was kind of interesting to see that, like, obviously it's a foundational piece of Brindlewood Bay and a lot of other games on the.
You're getting the time capsule version of me.
And you were kind of looking at it with fresh eyes, and you were just talking about it like a codified way to talk about a lot of the activities within a game. And you also mentioned in the OSR world, and I know there's like friction between the two sides, and
not as much as it used to be, but yeah.
But my opinion is I love games, right? That's my North Star, and so obviously any game brings value to the greater community. But when you found Powered by the Apocalypse versus say OSR, like was there ever any challenges or challengers to like the way you like to play games?
I mean, it's really funny. I have my personal history with story games and indie games versus say old school or OSR games is really, I think, an interesting one, because our podcast Sphere of a Black Dragon is all about kind of making those two things merge, right? Like my co-host Tom and I, we analyze OSR modules, but we do it through this lens of people who mostly play story games, right? And so for me, I will probably never be interested in OSR systems. It's not something that interests me from a gameplay standpoint. It's not to say they're bad; it's just not my thing. I don't care for that style of play anymore. I mean, I probably used to when I was younger, but like it's not really my thing anymore. But there's this like streak of really impressive and cool artistry and creative expression in the OSR community when it comes to adventures and modules. And so that's why we did the Fear of a Black Dragon podcast, because even though I am at my core a story gamer, and that's the kind of games I like to write and publish now, the adventure writing part of the OSR is really intriguing to me. And there's a lot of cool stuff there. And so I I always think that like those two sort of poles of indie gaming, if you will, I think they're actually much closer to each other than we think. There are some differences in terms of like gameplay and procedure and outcomes at the table, which is the real key difference for me and why I don't prefer OSR systems. But there's a lot of similarities too, and the similarities really are, they are really like baked into this idea of like the very concept of sort of like shared world building, right? I think they go about it different ways, but there's something like kind of really fundamentally similar there. And I think that what I love about a lot of like sort of like OSR, the adventure writing side of the OSR and the module creation side of the OSR, is it's just this really cool space to be so creative and wild, and to just to kind of like put something down that is like your particular vision, and that speaks to me, right? I like scenario-based play anyway. All my games are scenario-based, and so there's that appeal. Now my personal preferences are, Powered by the Apocalypse is my system, if you want to call it a system. It's my system, my preferred system. It's the games I play are mostly Powered by the Apocalypse games. My own system, Carved from Brindlewood, is more or less derived from PBTA. I don't think it needs PBTA. I think it's just that way because that's what I like to play. But I think you can actually do a lot of Carved from Brindlewood stuff in other systems if you wanted to. A lot of the ideas and principles would transfer over pretty well, especially when it comes to like mystery solving and stuff. But yeah, PBTA is my preference. It aligns with my own play style really closely. I've just always, once I understood it, it just fit my interests and my tastes and the way I want to play so well. It took me a minute to figure it out. Like I had a hard time figuring it out in the beginning, but once I did, the thing that really got me was Dungeon World was the game I mostly played back in the day to get into PBTA and Monster Hearts, but I didn't actually, the way I actually kind of learned PBTA and what it was doing was through this like little supplement that was published kind of like unofficially connected to Dungeon World, I think it was called like How to Play Dungeon World, or the Beginner's Guide to Dungeon World, or something like that. And it was like this 20-page thing that somebody put together to basically explain to people like me, like what Dungeon World was doing that was so cool. And once I understood that, I understood all of PBTA. Like once I understood that, I was like, oh, I get it. I understand Monster Hearts. I understand Apocalypse World. I understand Monster of the Week. There was something that I think even the authors of those games were not expressing very well in their texts, right? That this person who wrote this little how-to Dungeon World thing captured really well. And so me and a lot of other people, that was kind of our entree into PBTA, and what kind of like was the big light bulb moment, right? Like once I understood fundamentally what that system was doing and how it was different from traditional role-playing games, but how different, but also how it really easily and naturally tapped into like our basic sort of like role-playing and storytelling activities and impulses, and just codified what is otherwise like kind of just good table behavior. Once I understood all that, I was off to the races. And we ended up producing a podcast called Plus One Forward, or was it? Yeah, Plus One Forward, which was Rich Rogers's and Rach Shelke's podcast about PBTA games, which was pretty cool. That's no longer in production, but we did that. We had that show for a long time on our network, and that just further helped kind of develop this thinking and sort of just this like bigger conversation about PBTA. I think that a lot of people found very, we were able to add to that conversation.
And I do recall I stumbled across that 20-page document on Dungeon World on Reddit, of all places.
Yeah.
And I found it there, and I was like, yeah, it does unlock a lot of nuances of PBTA, and puts it in a language that you can go, oh, okay, initiative. Now,
well, yeah, because
I get
because
that.
a lot of the like the big four PBTA games at the time, which were Monster of the Week, Monster Hearts, AW, and DW, they as much as I love those games, they did a horrible job of explaining how PBTA works, right? Like they were not good. And like they were great games, and they're really fun, and I love those games, but they kind of all failed fundamentally at like just explaining to people like how this style of game worked, And later games that came out, I think, because they had the advantage of like sort of a community conversation and shared learning, like did a better job of it. And later editions of those games did a better job of it. AW2E is far superior to AW1E in my opinion. That we got there, but in those early days, it was a little tough. And so that little like supplementary DW thing for a lot of people, I think was like, oh, I get it. Yeah.
And we've teased it enough. Let's talk about Brindlewood Bay.
Yeah.
Bring it up on the screen here.
Mm-hmm.
And just tell us, where did I've heard the origin story of it on other podcasts and that kind of thing, but sure. Please do share it again, because I think it's a good one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, basically, I had started working on another game prior to Brindlewood Bay. I was working on this game which I mentioned already, The Between. That game did eventually come out, but I was originally working on The Between first. The Between is a game about monster hunters in Victorian era London, right? Kind of inspired by Penny Dreadful and things like that. And I knew that I wanted to have a mystery solving system in my podcasts at the time, and in some of my other, just chatter and stuff that I was involved in. I'd been thinking a lot about mysteries and Emergent Mystery and how to do mysteries in a different way, because I was like not super satisfied with mystery role-playing games as they stood at the time. And so I had like this idea of mysteries and mystery solving, it was a thing I wanted to crack with The Between, but I did not want to, as I was trying out my mysteries, this mystery system that I was coming up with, I didn't want to have to rewrite The Between over and over again. And so I made the decision to write a smaller game. I was like, I'm going to write just like a smaller game that can do mysteries, so I can try the mystery system out to see if I like it, and then I can transport it over to The Between. And that's where Brindlewood Bay came from. I don't remember exactly how it shook out, but if I recall correctly, I think I just was like on Twitter and I was like, what'd be a cool idea for a game, a mystery game, and I think someone said, "Oh, Murder She Wrote." I was like, "Oh yeah, that's cool. I love Murder She Wrote." And then someone else said, "It'd be funny, haha." I was like, Angela Lansbury, solving, or like, doing Lovecraft, or like that kind of, like an Angela Lansbury style Lovecraftian hero, and I was like, "Oh, that's kind of a cool idea." And so I kind of came up with this like idea of Cthulhu She Wrote, right, or that sort of idea of Murder She Wrote style mysteries meets cosmic horror, meets Lovecraftian horror. And that was basically where it started. And I was in kind of like in that particular point in my life, that the little 3 or so months I spent kind of working on this game, I was in a pretty dark place. I had some things going on in my life that were kind of not great. And so working on this little game actually was like really helpful to me, like because I was kind of forced to go watch some Murder She Wrote, and I was kind of, had to kind of think about Agatha Christie and think about these things, and think about the genre. And I just kind of got into like, and I was really enjoying the creative process. And so I did a lot of thinking and note taking. And by the time I was ready to actually start writing it, I wrote it really fast. The original digital version of Brindlewood Bay, I think I wrote it in like 2 days. And when it was all done, I was like, okay, I think this is going to be pretty cool. And so I put it out in the world for people to try out, and it went over great. And like I said earlier, we kept supporting it. We would release new mysteries and stuff in Codex, and also by themselves, just new mysteries to kind of support the game. And so there was always like a steady stream of new content for it, and it kind of just went from there. And the response has been great. I eventually took the lessons I learned from Brindlewood Bay and put them back into The Between, as I planned on doing. And then The Between also informed a lot of what would eventually end up in the full Kickstarter version of Brindlewood Bay. And so, yeah, that's sort of how the creative process went. It was just like this sort of back and forth between The Between and Brindlewood Bay. They're kind of in conversation with each other from a design standpoint. And but originally Brindlewood Bay was just like a sketch for The Between. But it kind of became its own thing, So
And as we're talking, not to interrupt you, sorry, talking about, I'll showcase the art by Cecilia Ferry, which
Cecilia Ferry, yeah,
that I think is incredible. But before we move on, I want to mention, so we got the Brindlewood Bay, which is recently kickstarted and now arriving in people's houses, and then we got Nephews in Peril, which was also kickstarted as part of that, and it's full of adventures from. Or do you have adventures in there, or is it just folks from the Gauntlet?
Nephews in Peril it's basically just more mysteries for the game. It's like more murder mysteries, but there's like a new style of mystery in there called a sweep mystery, which is kind of a non-murder, more supernatural heavy mystery. And all of the authors are they're from different places. It's mostly people we've worked with in the past on different things like Trophy and stuff. But we also have a few guest authors in there as well. But all the mysteries in the core book were written by me, and then all the mysteries in Nephews in Peril were written by other people. So,
and you can see in the picture here, like one of the things I like about all the art is that it's so light and fanciful, but then you've got like severed hands and eyeballs coming around corners. But just and going back to the mystery part of it, I think a lot of people. When they're designing games, especially anything that involves a mystery, you've got the Alexandrian, the 3 clue rule, you've got like kind of the onion of the Call of Cthulhu, you've got the gumshoe, and I'm sure you looked at all of those and were like trying to figure out like how to do the mystery. And I thought you came up with a really clever idea, and I kind of at first I was like, I don't know if I like that. I don't, because of, when you explain it, other people might agree. But then after like it sat with me for a while, and I went, as a GM or a keeper, it's such a fresh way to approach doing a mystery, and it just lightens the cognitive load of the GM so much, and just allows that kind of free flow improv, going back to that childhood version of playing, right?
Yeah. Well, and so folks have a better sense of it, I guess. The way the mysteries work in Brindlewood Bay is you have like, there's a murder, right? That the murder mavens, these elderly women who solve murder mysteries in their town because they read lots of murder mystery books. Therefore, they're obviously qualified to solve murder mysteries. The characters, there are these murders, but the keeper, who is what we call the GM, they don't know who did it, right? Nobody knows who did it in the beginning. There are no canonical solutions to these mysteries. And indeed, the characters can look for clues anywhere they want, and the keeper will have a list of clues that they can kind of pepper in wherever they need them. It's very kind of organic and emergent in that way. But basically the players, you collect your clues, and then once you have a certain number, you then put the clues together and you have a conversation and you solve the mystery. You're like, okay, we've got these 8 clues, and let's talk about them, and let's see, based off everything we know about the story so far, who do we think did it? Well, we have this clue that says this and this clue that says this, and then you start making little connections and you start having this conversation, and eventually as a group you come up with a theory. You're like, okay, I think this is who I think did it, and then you roll some dice to see if you're correct, and the die rolls aided by how many clues you're able to work into your theory, and then you take it from there. And the idea here, the reason why I think it works, why it's a good way of doing a mystery for a role-playing game, is because it leans into what I consider to be a strength of tabletop role-playing games versus other forms of media and entertainment. So there's a lot of things that a role-playing game can't do. Like we don't have actors and special effects, and a mystery book, a mystery novel has like a forced perspective, and so you can kind of deliver the mystery in a really controlled way. There's lots of things that we don't have in the role-playing game format, but the one thing we do have that films and books and TV shows don't have is, in video games, is we have collaborative storytelling, right? The one thing tabletop role-playing games can do that no other form of entertainment can do is we're all sitting around the table and we are collaboratively telling a story to each other. We are coming up with a story. And so I think that's why the mystery system of Brindlewood Bay and the other games that are based off it Why it works is because it leans into what is a fundamental strength of tabletop role-playing games, which is we're telling a story together. In this case, we're solving a mystery together. We're kind of creating the mystery as we solve the mystery, right? And it works. And you are still solving a mystery. It's just a mystery that, like, the solution previously didn't exist. It's kind of a weird thing, but I think it works well. And I think once people get into it, you get that feeling. It's like, oh, I'm having an actual proper conversation about solving this mystery. I'm not just going down a linear path, getting it wrong, and then the keeper just tells us the answer at the end anyway, right? It's different, right? So that's my feeling on it. That's my theory and philosophy of it, at least. And my thoughts on mysteries, they all come from different places. Really, truly, the most influential games on my mystery system is probably stuff like games like Lovecraft-esque, games like Meg Baker's Cyrun. These are games that have a version of the emergent mystery. We are kind of figuring out the mystery together as a play group. No one authored it beforehand. Those games, in my opinion, didn't quite do it the way I'm doing it, and the way I'm doing it makes more sense for my game. But definitely, even before Brindlewood Bay, there were games that were kind of nibbling around this idea of the emergent mystery and kind of what that might look like in gameplay terms. I happen to think I ran with some of those ideas and created a system that is really hardy and actually can be used in lots of different contexts, as I've shown with my other games, and that other people who are publishing with this, Carve from Brindlewood system, are showing. It doesn't have to be just murders. It can be supernatural mysteries. It can be, kids on bike style mysteries. It can be all kinds of stuff, because fundamentally what it all really boils down to is it's a way of, it's just taking the collaborative storytelling elements that exist in role-playing games anyway and just applying it to the mystery.
And I think, when I've heard some people that have bounced off it, and like I said, even me, originally I was like, I don't know if I like that, because of the fact that it like comes down to a die roll, whether you're successful. And then as, my wife is a big murder mystery fan, and we watched All Murders in the Building.
Yeah.
And as I was watching, some of these mystery shows, and the theorized part where they're spitballing and they're going, well, this person did this and this person did that.
That's what my game does. Yeah. Yeah.
That's what Brindlewood Bay does. Mm-hmm. And as you're doing that, it has guardrails, because basically it can't be true unless you can like prove it to be true. And so like the clues themselves and how it's laid out, like unless you can theorize it to be true, like, and that's the biggest problem when you're doing a mystery is like, there's the GM that they've come up with what they think is a clever mystery. But if things don't fall exactly right, like the whole session,
it often does not work. Yeah. It depends. Traditional mystery role-playing games depend on two things that are really, really difficult to master and nail. One, it depends quite a lot on the skill of the GM, and it depends quite a lot on the player skill, right? In terms of like, it just requires like a level of skill that we don't require any other part of role-playing games to do, right? Like, I sometimes get a little annoyed with people who bounce off the mystery system of Brindlewood Bay when they use this, they use this idea of like, well, I don't really feel like I'm solving a mystery. It's like, well, you know what? You have characters that cast spells, and you're not actually performing sorcery at the table either, but you still suspend your disbelief enough to play a game where you're casting spells, right? Like, it's the same thing. Like in role-playing games, there has to be a certain amount of like suspension of disbelief, and in any case, I happen to think Brindlewood Bay really does capture that feeling of like talking about and kibutzing and arguing and figuring out the solution to a mystery, right? Like it kind of captures that part of the mystery genre, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know. To me, I think it's exciting. To me, it's exciting that like you can have 5 groups play Dad Overboard, the starter mystery for Brindlewood Bay, and all of them will come up with a completely different solution, completely different story. I've run Dad Overboard probably 90 times, and it's always interesting and different, So, like I don't know. I don't really like. I don't really like put a lot of stock in like the utility of predetermined mysteries in role playing games. So
and I didn't want to put you on the spot to saying, people are bouncing hard off it, but like I'm just trying to like help others that like, I mean, my channel has a lot of like OSR kind of fans and viewers, and I kind of had this kind of light bulb moment, and as I was kind of going through it, and you'd watch these TV shows and you go, I can see how it applies and how it could work. And that is the whole suspension of disbelief of that, whether it's like, wrestling or a TV show, like you kind of like, it's fake in some respects. And but if you are willing to believe and put that aside, that it's a special, it can be a special engagement that you have with the fiction that you just can't achieve elsewhere. And to bring back to the stage, keeper principles, and like I said, I have a lot of OSR followers, and some of these like are like OSR, check the boxes, but let's just kind of run through them. Play to find out what happens, like no predetermined outcome. Make the world and everyone seem real. That's OSR mantra. FKR mantra, even be a fan of the mavens, like all this. Like I looked through the list and I'm like, OSR, at least what you would adhere to. And like you said, when you were talking about story games versus OSR games, it's like a horseshoe.
There are a lot of similarities. Yeah, it's horseshoe.
They're so close at the top.
It really is.
But how they get there is a little bit different.
The main difference is just that one values the input of die results and one values the input of conversation at the table. That's the only difference, really, in my opinion. Like, and not one is not better than the other. I personally prefer one over the other, but like to me, like that's the main difference. Like a lot of the goals are still the same. It's just sort of what we emphasize in gameplay, But.
And one of my absolute favorite things about Brindlewood Bay, and I mentioned this before we started recording, I'm like a latchkey kid. I was raised by TV. I just watched like way too much TV, including Murder, She Wrote, and anything that was on. I just watched it. And the move, which is powered by the apocalypse, is common. You name the moves after some of my favorite characters in all these fictional mystery stories.
All characters, incidentally. I don't know if you noticed that or not. They're all men.
Yeah.
Which is on purpose. So.
Yeah. So the B.A. Baracus from A-Team, Frank Colombo, and all of them, the moves, and like Frank Colombo, for example, maybe you can describe it because it's just such a like all the moves are so perfectly aligned with the characters.
Thanks. Yeah. So Frank Colombo's. Yeah. So all the moves are all based off of. They're all inspired by men detectives from TV shows from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Well, most of them anyway. Gordon Shumway is not a detective, but
Alf, for those that are,
it's Alf. Yeah. But the idea was I wanted all the character moves to be like men because I find that in older TV shows, women characters are like kind of accessories to the male characters, and so in my game, the men are the accessories to the women characters, right? But Frank Colombo, for example. If your Maven has the Frank Colombo move, wealthy people don't take her that seriously. They have like a blind spot for her, and so she's able to like get inside easier and learn more easier because rich people don't take her seriously, right? And that was a Colombo thing, right? Like Colombo's whole thing was he's kind of this rumpled guy, and so the people he's investigating, usually wealthy people, or they don't take him very seriously. They don't think he's that much of a threat. And so that's kind of the idea behind Frank Colombo. Whereas like the Dale Cooper move, Dale Cooper, of course, being the special agent in Twin Peaks, the Dale Cooper move, if your Maven has that, she's much more attuned to the sort of supernatural conspiracy or the supernatural aspects of the setting, right? So she has like these strange dreams and where she receives interesting, strange bits of information from this dream space, right? Very, very Dale Cooper-ish, right? Gordon Shumway, since we mentioned him, that of course is Alf, and the Gordon Shumway move, the Maven has a cat who is a very well-trained, responsive cat that helps her do things, and that's a little joke because Alf ate cats. So, yeah. But yeah, so that was kind of the idea. The idea is like I've got these like these basic like kind of special abilities I want the mavens to have, and we're gonna name them after these TV characters, because a lot of Brindlewood Bay, especially like when you're doing character creation and when you're just kind of, and just a lot of the references baked into the mysteries, a lot of it is like very like American pop culture references. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of my own personal taste in there. And I think part of the fun of the game is researching this stuff. So like if you are, if you're like, a millennial or a Gen Z person who doesn't know anything about the Rockford files, and you see this move, Jim Rockford, we're not going to know anything about you may not know anything about Jim Rockford, but maybe you'll Google it. And if you do, you'll maybe learn a little something. And I think that's fun. And so the game in a lot of ways is like an invitation to also kind of explore genre, so.
And the Thomas Magnum one, you played on the fact that Thomas was the living in the luxury due to Robin Masters, and then you took the last name Robert Masters and turned it into the author of the
of the
Crown
books
Mysteries.
The Mavens, like Robin Masters' son is her name. There's just, the game is loaded with references like that, right? Like it is peppered with like just references and Easter eggs, and if that's something you enjoy in reading and games, I think you'll like Brindlewood Bay. So
well, and essentially they almost act as like classes for the characters, right? Like in traditional role-playing games, like they really give some flair and character to each character to set them apart, each maven to set them apart.
It is class is a good way of looking at it, because they are essentially, the mavens are really kind of united by how they're similar, right? They're older women, elderly women, actually, who live in this little town, and they all love murder mystery books, right? But they do have some things that set them apart from each other. And so like they each have a hobby besides mystery books that they love, and that's important. They each have a personal style that's unique to them. And then they have this move that doesn't just say what they're good at doing, but also says something about them as a person, right? So if, for example, you take let me pick one here.
The R. Quincy one. I really liked the R. Quincy one.
Oh yeah, R. Quincy. That's perfect. Yeah. So the R. Quincy one, the move gives you a medical bag, and when you're using your medical bag, you get advantages on your die rolls. But the reason why they have that medical bag is because they used to be a nurse or a doctor. They used to be like a healthcare professional in their previous life before they moved to Brindlewood Bay. So the move, says something about them as a maven as well. So, in some sense, I guess it is kind of like their class in a way. It's one way of looking at it, definitely.
And Sonny Crockett, fashionista.
Fashion is their thing, right? Yeah, exactly.
And, Michael Knight, Kit from Knight Rider, and they have a vehicle that kind of gets them out of tights. But, So, anyways, I just saw it and I was like, that's fun to me as a aficionado. And then you also have alternate moves, which are based upon famous mystery folks, which also kind of just like makes people delve into the genre. And before we get further, I cannot help but think, as soon as like you put the game together and you were thinking about all the mysteries, like the library of TV shows and movies that you could pull from, like all these books, all these there's so much to draw upon.
Yeah, it really is.
But alternate moves, you've got everything from Nancy Drew to the Hardy Boys to Tintin, and each one of them has their own kind of specialty. I actually really like the Clarice Starling. Obviously, if you're a fan of Silence of the Lambs, why don't you describe that move just to let people know kind of how that plays out?
The Clarice Starling move is really intriguing because basically what happens is, after you solve your first mystery, that's when the Clarice Starling move kind of kicks in, because essentially what happens is, it doesn't have to be this way, but this is mostly usually how it goes. The murderer from that mystery you solved, you get to keep going back to them and consulting with them, much like Clarice Starling consulted with Hannibal Lecter about serial killers, right? About Buffalo Bill. And so your maven now has this connection to this murderer. And as the campaign progresses, and the game is very campaign focused, because something we didn't mention is week to week, they're doing like murder mysteries, but it's all connected by this like bigger occult conspiracy, right? That all kind of culminates at the end. as the campaign progresses, the character who has the Clary Starling move, their relationship with this person they consult with deepens, right? And it's not really a spoiler, but because it's right there in the move, but eventually that character will escape prison and come after the murder maven, right? Like, and so it's like that move is like a little built-in storyline, right, which kind of plays out over time, and it's really fun. It's super fun to see how it works and how it goes, and yeah, I love that one. It's pretty different from the other moves, but it's fun.
And I mean, it is just like essentially a TV show. So if you loved any of these like serial TV shows with sometimes an overarching plot that would go through the season or seasons, and you even frame it like that, you've got your recaps and cliffhangers and everything like that. It's
commercial breaks, even
commercial breaks, and and the mavens also too. I have to ask, do you know any elderly women that are actually playing this, or is it all us younger people that imagine ourselves that we where she wrote?
I don't know of any like public groups made of older women who are playing it, but I do hear stories of younger people running it for their grandmothers and aunties and stuff, and loving it, right? Kind of a related point though. Brindlewood Bay is actually, it is the first time GMing game for a lot of new people. Like for a lot of people, for whatever reason, Brindlewood Bay is their first game they've ever run. Often it's for a lot of women, it's their first game they've ever run. And I think the reason why that is because it is subject matter that, okay, maybe you don't know a lot about like traditional fantasy role-playing games, and so you don't have that way in, but you definitely watched Murder, She Wrote with your grandma, right? And so you kind of fundamentally know something about the subject matter. And so I think for a lot of people who are not super into role-playing games, or they've never run one, they find a lot of comfort in running Brindlewood Bay because it has those familiar touchstones, right? And because the game presents itself in a slightly lighter, less intimidating way too. So I think for a lot of people, it's a nice like entree. I'm also really proud of how we wrote it in terms of like supporting brand new keepers, but yeah, I don't know of any like public groups made up of older women who are running and playing the game, but I've heard I've heard like, on the side, lots of stories of I ran this for my grandparents at Christmas, or I ran this for my aunts and uncles, at the holidays or whatever. And and I hear those stories all the time, and it's always very fun. Another thing I love about Brindlewood Bay is, for whatever reason, well, I'm sure I know the reason, but for whatever reason, a lot of people, when they run Brindlewood Bay, they do it with lots of like in-person accessories. So I always get pictures of like, I made cake, and so we had a cake in the middle of the table while we played Brindlewood Bay, or everybody had their own like little, like their own little personal like, little teapot or something, or we made a tasting menu to go with the game. For Brindlewood Bay is a kind of game that people engage with in a way that's also about like comfort activities, and things like that. So I love that about it. I think that's really fun. Now, what those people may not realize is they get deeper into the campaign, the game gets really bloody and disgusting and gross. But like, that's just my taste peeking out, because don't get it twisted. Brindlewood Bay is an incredibly disgusting and gross game. Like as the campaign progresses, it gets so dark and so horrifying. But in the early sessions, it's quite light and lovely. So yeah.
Cool. And then, speaking of potentially like darker content, you've also got the public access game, which right now, the 90s are kind of showing their face again.
Having a moment.
A moment. And so tell us about public access. And you mentioned the development of public access and the between and everything together. Like how did one leapfrog over the other and vice versa? And where did you learn from it?
Yeah, so public access is a game it takes place in the year 2004, and it's about a group of people who met on an online forum. And back in the late 80s and early 90s, they lived in this town called Deep Lake, New Mexico. And Deep Lake, New Mexico had this local public access TV station called TV Odyssey, which, oh, by the way, my shirt is TV Odyssey t-shirt.
And where can they buy them?
That can be purchased. I don't have a link handy, but I'll give you a link to share.
I'll put the links all in the description.
Yeah. But yeah, so we TV Odyssey is this TV station, this weird public access TV station. Anyway, these people all met on this forum because they are interested in this TV station, which literally disappeared. It like vanished from the face of the earth, and not many people remember it for some strange reason. But the people on this forum, they remember it. And they also, and the player characters actually lived in the town where the TV station was. And so they all decide, we're going to get together one summer, the summer of 2004. We're going to go back to Deep Lake. We're going to rent a house, and we're going to figure out what happened to TV Odyssey. And they get to Deep Lake, they rent the house, and they're looking for these tapes called the Odyssey tapes. And the tapes are all episodes of TV shows that aired on TV Odyssey. And in the middle of like their investigation of TV Odyssey, they stumble onto other mysteries taking place around the town of Deep Lake, because Deep Lake is just a really weird place where really weird things happen. And so as the summer progresses, in the middle of investigating this weird TV station that no one remembers except them, and trying to find these tapes that are incredibly strange and mythical and rare, they are also like learning about cryptids in the area. They're learning about, you know, all these other like little historical mysteries in the town, and they're kind of getting involved in the community and kind of reconnecting with this little town they used to live in when they were kids.
So it's kind of like the adults coming back.
It has that vibe. Yeah, it definitely has some it vibes. That's a pretty good touchstone. And it's a game that's about nostalgia. It's about it kind of leans into analog and found footage horror movements. Like it's kind of got that kind of vibe. It's all about I think it's very scary. I've had people tell me it's like the hands down scariest gameplay experience they've ever had. Like I think the game can be really quite terrifying. And genuinely, like I think it's really hard to do horror in a role-playing game, and I think we've gotten really, really close in public access to making that sensation of like feeling like genuinely creeped out, you know? And yeah, it's weird. It's scary. It's got all kinds of, again, because of my writing style, it has loads of pop culture references, and it wears its like pop culture love on its sleeve. It's got so many like just different vibes that all kind of come together in this weird setting in the middle of a desert in New Mexico. And from a design standpoint, I originally was toying around with a version of this game back in 2014. I had this idea for a game inspired by the creepypasta story Candle Cove. And Candle Cove has a really similar setup to what my game has a really similar setup to what Candle Cove is, which is people on a forum remembering this old kids TV show that kind of went away, and that nobody else remembers it, but they remember it and they're talking about it, you know? And that was kind of the initial inspiration for public access like 10 years ago when I started thinking about this as a game. I never published it or really even wrote it, but I kind of was just toying around with this idea, and I kind of abandoned it for a while. And it wasn't until after Brindlewood Bay and The Between when I started to see how the mechanics of those games might help me go back to public access and do this, you know, kind of explore this other idea that I had a long time ago. Now I had like a framework and some tools to really kind of do something cool with it, I thought. And the reception's been great. People have really loved public access when they've seen it and played it. I think for a lot of people, especially people my age, it taps into a lot of, well, you know, the characters are called the Deep Lake Latchkeys. Like if you're a latchkey kid, public access will speak to you, right? Like it is, because I was a latchkey kid, and so I very much write my experiences into the game, you know. And so it's all about like it's a game, it's a horror game, it's an analog horror game, it's a weird cosmic horror game, but really fundamentally it's about nostalgia and it's about trauma. There's a lot of like childhood trauma themes in it. The characters are all kind of they're kind of like, to do a fun thing for the summer, a fun, creepy thing for the summer. But as they get deeper into it, they start to remember things from their past. They start to remember things about the town. They start to get really, really pulled into the deeper, darker aspects of what's going on in Deep Lake. And it's I don't know. I think it's pretty cool. Sorry, that was a lot. But
no, it's definitely a game that caught my attention. And do you have any kind of timeline as far as like when you think it might go to Kickstarter? Or
not yet. No, we're still kind of having fun with it in its current form, and we still release a lot of new stuff for it on Patreon. So like the Gauntlet Patreon is a great place to get brand new material for all our games. But we have a lot of stuff for public access in our feed. The game itself, as published on Drive-Thru, comes with like 8 mysteries or something like that, and all the stuff you need to play. And then we release brand new mysteries and things in the Patreon. But we'll do that for a little while. The Between is first for crowdfunding, and then probably public access will come after. If I'm lucky, public access might kickstart like Halloween this year or something, somewhere around there. So, but no, its current form is working for me, and it's. I know a lot of people are clamoring for a physical version of it, but just gotta wait.
So now that now that you've got this publishing empire that you can just delay Kickstarters,
such as it is.
Do you have like a long-term view of like where the Gauntlet or your own publishing writing career could go in the future? Like where do you see yourself in 5 years, 10 years, whether you're yourself or the Gauntlet?
I mean, I always have I'm a very I consider myself a pretty long-term thinker, and I try to set goals, and I try to, for everything I do, I try to set a goal and try to meet that goal. And sometimes you hit your goals, sometimes you don't, but always I think if you're moving forward, you're doing good. And right now, I would love for the Gauntlet to eventually be the size of like an Evil Hat or a Free League or something like that. Like I would like for us to reach that, kind of level. We're not there yet, but that's, kind of what I envision. More than anything, I just want to make sure that we maintain our particular point of view. I happen to think the Gauntlet has a really particular point of view when it comes to role-playing games. It's a point of view informed by play. Like nothing we do in the Gauntlet is theoretical. Like we play, and that's where everything we do comes from. Like I run games, I play games, our community runs games and plays games, and every discussion we have in the Gauntlet is through the lens of play. And so I never want to lose sight of that. And I also am really interested in continuing to shape what I consider to be the Gauntlet's sort of creative house style. And I think that our games have a really particular vibe, from Trophy to Brindlewood Bay to the Between, etc. Like I think that there are some definite through lines in all those games that you can see that make them what I consider to be a quote Gauntlet game, right? And so I want to keep developing that and keep focusing on that, focusing on horror, which is our sort of preferred genre, but also the mystery genre, and really, really focusing on the writing. We take the writing really seriously. Like the words really, really matter to us, and just keep the focus on play. Like that focus on play has a lot of like impact on how we write books and how we present information in books. And because I write for GMs, like that's who I write for. Like the players get their little 10 pages in the front for the things they need to know, but I truly write the books for GMs. I want the GMs to understand like how a game works and how they can be successful with it, because I do podcasts where I talk a lot about those issues, right, and those topics. And so I'm a GM's GM, right? Like I always, and I'm a GM's game writer. And so I because I think that that's the most important thing. Not that players aren't important. Obviously players are important, but I think that for the hobby to flourish and for like my business to keep growing, for the industry to be healthy, we need people running games, right? And so I'm going to do everything I can to make sure people know how to run our games successfully, right? And so, so all of that is just, because in the Gauntlet we don't treat role-playing games as it's not a theoretical discussion for us. It's not like oh, wouldn't this be cool? Or, oh, I'm just going to read books all day, which is fine. Go read books. We love people who just read books. I mean, their money spends the same as everybody else's, but But what we really, really want to encourage is people to play games. Like, I think that the playing part of role-playing games is really, really important. And so, so no matter how our business grows, no matter what we do, I want to make sure, and I indeed feel it's my job to make sure that we are focused on our point of view and we maintain our particular perspective on the hobby and the industry. Whether we are, you know, I would feel that way if we were making $10,000 a year, or $10 million a year. Like, I would have that same point of view about it. So I want to focus on maintaining our particular perspective. Yeah.
And
if that makes sense, I don't know.
Yeah, no, totally. No, and I appreciate that, because when you talk about the theory part of it, I mean, everybody I know, I'm sure yourself even, you have a giant bookshelf full of games that you've never got to the table, and you look at them and go, I like the theory in it, and there's something about tabletop role-playing game fans that sometimes that's enough, like just reading
and there's
enough.
value in that, right? There's totally value in that, right? Like, it's not, I don't want to like say like, oh, it's wrong to like just buy and read books. There's nothing wrong with that, but for us, we like to play. So
yeah. But to that point though, of like, you know, sometimes what you read and you think is going to work at the table doesn't actually work at the table. And so it's always good to kind of test it out. But before we leave, I just have to ask, so you got Carved in Brindlewood, which is basically now is it a gaming license, so to speak, or like
I see. Well, so that's a great question. I want to cut you off, but like, we are actually putting out this year, pretty soon actually, the Carved from Brindlewood Creators Kit. People don't need permission from us to make Carved from Brindlewood games. They can do whatever they want to do. If they use our color, like our characters and stuff, they need to ask us first, but otherwise they can do whatever they want to do. That said, we are going to put together this creators kit that has all the licenses you need and all the permissions and all the phrases you need to put in your book to make sure you're on the up and up with us, but also actual guidance for how to create a game that uses our tool set. So, you know, the mystery system, the various sub rules and mechanics, like in the between added a lot to the formula that Brindlewood Bay doesn't have, for example. All that stuff is going to be in the Carved from Brindlewood Creators Kit. So that is happening this year, pretty soon, probably by the end of the first quarter at least. That'll be available. That we'll make available for everybody to use, and hopefully we'll see lots of CFB games out there. So, yeah.
Great. Well, I just want to say, you know, thanks for coming on the show,
Thank you for having me.
sharing your wisdom and knowledge about the game design world, and sharing your creativity. And like I said, I really enjoyed Brindlewood Bay. It was
I'm glad you did.
Just fun to flip through and read. And I haven't got it to the table yet, but I do plan to. And it's got to be at the table, right?
Yeah.
Can't just be theory. But yeah, thanks for coming on, Jason, and wish you all the best in the future.
No, thanks so much. It was really nice.